Good morning. I'm Sarah Wyant, the founder and editor of Agri-Pulse Communications, and I'm really pleased to see such interest in our topic today, rural renaissance, how investments in transmission modernization can drive rural economic development. As some of you know, when I'm not working in Washington, D.C., I live in a rural area of Missouri, outside of a small town of about 3,000 people. So I can personally attest to how important it is to have a reliable electrical infrastructure. We cannot be located in a rural area or create jobs here without it. So during our webinar today, you're going to hear from our distinguished speakers with facilitated questions and answers. I'm going to make brief speaker introductions and encourage you to dig into their full biographies on our website. We also want to hear from you, the attendees. So feel free to offer your questions in the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen, not the chat box. If you are experiencing any technical issues, we have a team here that can assist you. In addition, we will also be recording today's discussion, and the webinar will be available later this week on agri-pulse.com. So before we start, I'd really like to thank our sponsor for the program, Americans for Clean Energy Grid. Without their sponsorship, it would not be possible to host this informational discussion. And now I'd like to welcome our first speaker, USDA Undersecretary for Rural Development, Torres Small. She was confirmed to the position in 2021. Before coming to rural development, Torres Small was a United States representative for the 5th largest district in the country. She was the first woman and first person of color to represent New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District. She served on the Rural Broadband Task Force and the House Agriculture Committee. Torres Small has a law degree from the University of New Mexico School of Law, an undergraduate degree from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and an international baccalaureate from Waterford Kamlaba United Rural College of Southern Africa. So at this time, I'm really pleased to welcome Undersecretary Torres Small.
Sarah, thank you so much. And it's lovely, as always, to see you. Good morning, everyone. And thanks so much for including me in the program today. I love the title of this conversation, Rural Renaissance, how investments in transmission modernization can drive rural economic development. I think being in the electricity business or being in the transmission business is not always the shiniest gem, but it's certainly the thing that people pay the most attention to when things go wrong. And making sure that we modernize our energy grid is crucial for future investments when it comes to growing businesses and when it comes to quality of life across rural America. So it's an honor to represent an agency with an incredible history in electricity. Rural electrification is rural development's legacy, as you all know, and it's a symbol of our long-standing investment in, commitment to, and partnerships with rural electric co-ops. The reason why rural electric co-ops were the answer for how to electrify our nation is because they are so local, because they are connected to the communities, because the people who sit on those boards are often also farming in the community, or small business owners, or volunteer firefighters. These are people who know and work with and are the people they serve. They want to make sure we have resilient energy for the future. Indeed, today, grid resiliency and security are our priorities, and we share that with you. I know that all of us look forward to the day when we can look back on grid modernization in a way that we look back on rural electrification. But as you know, it's always a moving target. It's maintenance that will always have to occur. The good news is that we largely know and agree on some of the things that need to be done. One of my first visits as undersecretary was in Virginia, and I got to meet one of the leading folks at Rappahannock Rural Electric Cooperative. And he was talking about smart grid and the impact that broadband can have when it comes to more energy efficient delivery and transmission. It was a great eye-opener for all of the impacts that rural electric co-ops can have, and that they are truly at the cutting edge of the future when it comes to this work. Rural electric co-ops also share best practices with other providers. Recently, I was in Washington visiting a public utility district that uses a smart grid for that more energy efficient delivery system, but also identifying challenges like fallen trees or potential fire hazards to respond quickly and maintain service. As is often the case, that utility started solving problems some time ago. But because of that work, rural development was later able to work with them to help provide broadband across the region. It's brought convergence between the electric grid and broadband networks, which allows for increased operational efficiency and reliability, better planning, and deeper understanding of how electric co-ops and other utilities can best serve their members. That's why I enjoy working in the electricity space. It's one of the clearest recognitions that we truly rely upon each other, from energy generation to safe distribution. We get to work with utilities that have been innovating since the 1930s, and we can make sure that we can give their efforts the kind of boost that benefit both long and short-term goals. We can also share their best practices with co-ops all over the country. This is crucial because we all need our grid to be more efficient, stronger, and more reliable. And we know that no single entity can achieve this alone. Everyone here today is showing up to address the challenges at hand, and I want to thank you for that. We all know that our work and progress on grid resiliency isn't necessarily going to attract big headlines, but it's only when things go wrong that the vulnerabilities of our grid become everyone's problem and concern. Everyone knows when the lights go off. But as we work to rebuild in the wake of those moments, we are also forging new solutions. Disasters can create proof points that demand cooperation and inspire innovation that can have a lasting impact. Rural development was proud to be there on the ground in Texas, funding local utilities to help respond to the challenges they faced due to the weather there, and also into diversifying the electricity grid, recently funding Lone Star Solar, which expanded the access to renewable energy across Texas. When you work in electricity, you know what 24/7 means. You know you're accountable to your community in the hard times as well as the good ones. And your communities are looking to you more and more, from broadband and smart grids to beneficial electrification. It's an emerging trend and an interesting growth area for electric cooperatives. And I say growth seriously, because when we talk about the challenges that rural communities face when it comes to scale, beneficial electrification offers a way to help address that. It's a win-win-win, good for business, good for people's pocketbooks, and good for fighting extreme weather and climate change. I'm excited to work with all of you to make the most of this opportunity. We're looking closely at the inventory of all of our projects that Congress has given us, all the tools that rural development has, so we can help put them to this purpose. Whether it's financing rural energy savings program, for consumer-based beneficial electrification projects, whether it's through REAP, one of our most popular programs, or surprisingly through RBCS, which can finance consumer investments in energy efficiency measures, as well as electronic vehicle charging stations. We also are looking towards beneficial electrification in our housing projects, and know that all three of our pillars, electricity, business, or utilities, business, and housing, have a role to play because all have energy efficiency elements to them. We can even finance utility scale efforts, as you all know, with infrastructure or energy efficiency programs. I know we have a long way to go, and I know there's more we all want to do, faster and better than we're able to at this very moment. But a lot is going right, and not least of which is the unique partnerships in this space. Those of us who collaborate on grid security and resiliency day to day now must stick together and support each other. You all have my commitment that I am with you in this critical endeavor. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Undersecretary. It's always great to have you with us. And I know that you're on travel today and can't stay very long, but I would like to ask you one question, and that is talk to us a little bit about workforce capacity right now at rural development. It would be an understatement to say that it's even just a big agency. It's a mammoth mission area, and you cover literally every state and territory. And, during COVID, we saw a lot of people change jobs. We've got a new administration, which is going through the political appointee process, trying to name state directors in every state. Tell us where you're at with your workforce. Are you at 100% capacity now and able to address all these challenges from a workforce perspective?
Sarah, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that question. I think our greatest asset at rural development are the people who live in the communities they serve, whether it's our general field representatives that so many of the utilities are used to working with, whether it's our staff on the ground, our long tenured career service people. I'm humbled, and it's happened multiple times in just my first 6 months here, where I meet a civil servant who's been working in rural development for longer than I've been alive. There's just an incredible amount of dedication to our mission and experience that helps us do our job the best we can every single day. So it's certainly crucial that we have their backs. And we've seen that having people on the ground makes a difference. Congress has chosen to continue to invest in rural development. So from 2009 to 2019, our program dollars increased by 85%. But at that same time, the staffing funding actually decreased by 35%. So it's a big challenge that we face to get more money out the door, to continue to reach communities, and then to find new communities to connect with while we're experiencing a decreasing in staff. We've been working hard on that to make sure that the positions that we have are filled. You mentioned COVID-19 and some of the challenges across the country with staffing. We were actually able to increase positions in rural development in FY 2021. We went from just over 4,400 to over 4,600. And then in FY 22, even while we were under a CR, we prioritized hiring in state and area offices. The 2023 budget is very exciting. The president's 2023 budget, the request includes an increase of another 577 FTEs, which would bring the funded level up to 5,343. So we see this as a crucial moment of investment for that technical assistance that rural development is so well known for. We are also, and I appreciate you bringing up state directors. It is a constant focus of mine. We've made significant improvement since I've been on the job. We are now at 40 of 47. There's also incredible diversity in experience. I'd like to mention our state director in Alabama. I believe he's the first Black American state director in Alabama. He's also a farmer and a long-term RD employee. He's one of those people who's been on the job for decades. So I'm deeply proud of the state directors, that the political appointees that we have in place, and also just grateful for the entire civil service team that we have on the ground.
Thank you very much for answering that. And I did see a couple others have come in, but in the interest of time, I'm going to send those to you and your team and let you go ahead and respond to some other questions that came in for you. Thank you again for joining us while you're on the road trip today. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Take care.
So next, we had planned to have Congressman Frank Lucas from Oklahoma join us, but as in all things in Congress, you never know exactly when the vote sessions are going to be held, and so he's voting right now. And so we're going to introduce Congressman Lucas a little bit later in our program, and also bring in all of our other panelists who are here with us right now. That includes the administrator of the Rural Utilities Service, Chris McLean. He was named to the position in 2015. He also serves as the assistant administrator for electric programs at RUS. He received an LLM in International and Comparative Law from Georgetown University in 1985, a JD from Creighton University School of Law in 1982, and a degree in Business Administration from Creighton University in 1980. We found out he actually was born in the Chicago area, but moved out to Nebraska and now in Washington, D.C. And we are really pleased to have the administrator with us to make a few opening comments before we go to our next panelist. So Administrator McLean, it's all yours.
Oops, let me put my microphone on. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Undersecretary, for a wonderful presentation. The Rural Utilities Service, give you a little quick background in my opening comments here. RUS is the successor agency to the Rural Electrification Administration, created in 1935 by executive order by President Roosevelt, and then a year later through the passage of the Rural Electrification Act in 1936. And in 1949, Congress expanded our mandate to include financing telecommunications when Harry Truman signed the telecom amendments into law. Now, we have a water program as well. The water program traces its roots to the 1936 Resettlement Act. And so, we like to think of ourselves as a New Deal agency with the 21st century mission. So we finance electric infrastructure, telecommunications, broadband infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure all across rural America, touching every state and territory of the United States. We like to think of ourselves as infrastructure are us at RUS. Now, as the Undersecretary explained, rural development is a cluster of three separate agencies, but we all work together with a mission to be able to make life, quality of life in rural America better and as wonderful as it can be. So the Rural Utility Service focuses on, as the name suggests, utility investments. Our sister agency, Rural Business Cooperative Service, has business projects they finance through some loans and grants, energy efficiency measures and renewable measures at rural businesses and farm operations. And then the Rural Housing Service, as the name implies, invests in single-family, multifamily housing, but also has an amazing, wonderful program called Community Facilities, which will help communities finance any asset that they need for a municipal or nonprofit entity that serves the community, everything from libraries, fire engines, to major hospitals. At RUS, we do invest in infrastructure, and be made clear though, we are not a regulator, nor are we a permitting agency. We are an incentive financer. We put loans and grants to work, and we try to use the attractiveness of those financial offerings to be able to get utilities to be able to provide services that rural America needs. In the electric program, anything you can imagine in the electric grid is financeable by our agency for eligible service to rural communities. So distribution, transmission, generation, renewables, smart grid technologies, energy efficiency, security investments, cybersecurity, grid security investments. RUS is a lender to about 65% of the rural electric cooperatives across the United States directly. But we also finance two financial institutions that effectively provide us some financing through relending to really the entire ecosystem. But even though we are best known for our work with rural electric cooperatives and our electric program, our program is fully open, and we do a number of loans with municipal utilities, investor-owned utilities, and tribal utilities. Only individuals are precluded from our program, individuals and partnerships with individuals. We have about 600 borrowers in our program. And renewables and transmission that serves renewables are increasingly important to our mission. So the renewable portfolio at RUS has been growing rapidly over time. Fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21, we doubled the dollar investment in renewable investments from 100 million to over 200 million, and increased the from year to year 50% our investments in megawatt. So it's renewables is a growing area. We also have had so back to renewables, we did last year, we did 16 individual solar facilities, 1 microgrid facility, and 1 hydroelectric facility providing financing. So another big growth area for us, as the Undersecretary mentioned, is smart grid. And because smart grid is very much part of the transmission story, very much part of the renewables story, because in the 21st century, moving information and data is almost as important to an electric utility as moving electrons. And here I will leave you with closing comments about smart grid. Interesting fact, in the last 2 fiscal years, the RUS electric program alone financed more miles of line of fiber-based smart grid than we did miles of line of power lines. FY 2020, it was slightly more. FY 21, the gap grew a little bit more. We financed as much fiber in the electric program alone to circle the globe, 25,000 plus miles of fiber. In addition, we have rural electric cooperatives participating in our telecom programs, Reconnect Loan and Grant Program, and the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund program. So this big ecosystem that serves rural America is really the backbone of our economy. We're proud to be part of it, and we'll be delighted to be able to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you, Administrator. We do have some more questions coming in, which is great. So when we get to the Q&A after our next two panelists, we'll bring you around. And some of these are really focused on your part of the mission area. Next up is our panelist, Rob Gramlich. And Rob is Executive Director of Americans for Clean Energy Grid. He's also the founder and president of Grid Strategies, LLC. He's got a really robust experience in this area. He oversaw transmission policy for the American Wind Energy Association from 2005 to 2016. He was an economic advisor to FERC Chairman Pat Wood III from 2001 to 2005, and a senior economist at PGM Interconnection in 1990 and 2000. Gramlich has a Master of Public Policy degree from UC Berkeley and a Bachelor of Arts with honors in economics from Colby College. So welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here, and thanks to everybody for joining to talk about our favorite subject at Americans for a Clean Energy Grid, which is transmission. And we bring together a diverse group of organizations and individuals who see the benefit and the opportunity for upgrading our large-scale regional and interregional grids for a variety of purposes, one of which is integrating clean energy, which we'll talk about how that drives rural economic development. And then a separate reason is just reliability and resilience. As the weather gets weird and there are threats to different power systems, we keep finding that power sharing from one region to the next is a way to keep the lights on. It keeps happening over and over again, at least when there is sufficient capacity. Texas sort of famously last year did not have enough capacity, but the Great Plains to the north of Texas did have enough transmission to generally keep the lights on. So reliability and resilience, as well as clean energy integration, are really driving a renaissance in transmission, and we think that will also drive a renaissance in rural economic development. So I'm just going to go through just a couple of factoids and slides and then get back to the conversation. If you could go to the next slide on some of the rural economic development benefits. Most of this energy, if you look at a large build out of wind and solar, which could happen for a variety of reasons, just really on cost alone now. Wind and solar are so cheap relative to other options. But building wind and solar, there will be some on people's sort of rooftops and close to demand, but most of it's really going to be out in rural areas. And so that leads to lease payments to whoever owns the land. It leads to property taxes for the communities that host the generation, and the same for the transmission. The hosts of the transmission and the generation receive some of those lease payments and tax revenues. So you can just see sort of some of the numbers here. Another benefit to rural America, obviously water is scarce in a lot of places at different times, depends on the year, but the electric industry, the generation out there actually consumes a lot of water. And what we can do is displace a lot of that water consuming electricity with wind and solar that barely use any water, a little bit to sort of wash off the solar panels, but really very little water consumption. So that will help save water for higher and better uses of that water. So that's those are just some of the ideas here. The links are there You can get that from us at Americans for a Clean Energy Grid or Agri-Pulse, I'm sure, after this. And then just to show a couple of pictures of what we're looking at on the next slide. We have wind and solar around the country, and really what we need to do is link up these different areas. What happens is the wind may be blowing in one place but not another, or the sun shining in a sunny area and not the cloudy area, and you end up moving power back and forth across very wide areas. So this is sort of a grid of the future vision of what we're looking forward to. Building these lines will be hard. There's a lot of existing corridors, highways and rail, that we can bring into the into utilization for these lines. But this is the type of transmission that we're looking at going forward. And then just the last picture here. This is a project that my team at Grid Strategies worked on with Americans for a Clean Energy Grid on a bunch of projects. There's actually a lot of projects. We counted 22 that are really ready to go. It's very hard to permit these lines, but these projects are pretty much there, pretty much at the finish line. They could use a little boost financially. Transmission kind of benefits everybody to some extent. We talked about those reliability events. So the challenge is getting private parties to fund the transmission. That is more like an interstate highway, and then it benefits kind of everybody. It's the means through which owners of wind and solar farms out in rural areas can deliver their product to market, kind of like selling soybeans or grain, and but it's also sort of, again, for that resilience, reliability benefit, the way we keep the lights on, which of course benefits everybody. So there are some financing tools in the bipartisan infrastructure law, some additional that may be coming in legislation that's pending now in Congress. And then Sarah mentioned I used to work at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I don't imagine most people here know the FERC or the energy jargon so much. FERC is the regulator, and they have a big say in which lines get planned and who pays for which lines. So they're doing a lot right now to try to get some of these large-scale regional and interregional lines built. But we can talk more about that in the Q&A about what are the barriers and what are some of the policy solutions going on. But why don't I leave it there for now, Sarah, and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate that those maps and an overview of what's already out there that has the potential to be built out. I think we're going to have a very robust discussion. There's lots of questions coming in, so thank you very much for that intro. Next up, we're going to hear from Denise Bode. She has over 40 years of experience in public policy at the state and federal levels, and leads a federal policy practice at Michael Best Strategies. Denise has been a national leader in all sectors of the energy industry, from oil, gas, renewables, former CEO of the Independent Petroleum Association of America, as well as the American Wind Energy Association. As a statewide elected official, she also served as the industry's chief regulator, serving as chair of the Oklahoma Corporation Commission for 10 years. She shepherded in the first wind farms in Oklahoma, and those have continued to explode across the state if you've driven by there lately, as I have. And she's worked in other states in the region and FERC to shepherd in the first regional transmission tariffs in the US, expanding access for farm country to all electric energy markets. She graduated from the University of Oklahoma, has 2 law degrees, including an LLM from Georgetown University. Welcome, Denise.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I didn't realize till I got on the webinar that Chris also had an LLM from Georgetown. So it must be something that's in the water, right, out in farm country, that we decide that we need that extra education in order to make our case. So a lot of fun hearing everyone else's background. You know, being a state regulator for 10 years at just that very pivotal time when we were moving from sort of our antiquated, outdated look at how electric could be used and the benefits it could bring and the different sources of electricity, as really wind and solar became commercially viable, and prices started really dramatically dropping for that kind of electric generation. And then the need for expansion of our transmission grid all came at the same time. And I felt really blessed to spend that 10 years in a place where I could make a difference in the Southwest, where I had a number of commissioners from all the Southwest Power Pool surrounding states who wanted to all change the economic outcome for all our constituents. And in Oklahoma, for example, we have two major cities, Oklahoma City and Tulsa, and then we have all of the rest of the state where economic development in farm country is small town America. And the challenge that really we face working with our co-ops, working with our investor-owned utilities to try to really expand not only the grid, but fiber, and to expand high-speed internet was really an amazing challenge, because at the commission, we regulated all three. So it was a wonderful opportunity, as Sarah said, to work on some of these projects. It's actually how I met Rob, when he was working at FERC, and we worked together as a team at the federal and the state level to really expand the grid, which really in turn really dramatically impacts economic development in a state. The fact that you can site these DC lines, and that you can move electricity from these wind farms and solar arrays from one place to another, that means that electricity is also available where it's coming from. And I think a lot of folks just think, oh, well, this is like just a flyover thing. It is not. I can name project after project that has had direct economic benefit on the communities where they built out the grid, built out this electric generation through renewables. I think the statistics Rob showed, the jobs that are being created in Western Oklahoma. I mean, my husband is a 5th generation rancher from Western Oklahoma. We built, when I was on the commission, with our investor-owned utilities as well as with our rural electric co-ops, we built a lot of transmission, and we built a lot of wind farms beginning in that era, and have continued. And it has inured to the benefit of those communities, because it has attracted those larger manufacturing and other businesses that have located where they know they've got affordable electricity and good reliability, because we're building out new projects, and they have that electricity available. And it's also allowed us to really balance our grid, because we have a variety of resources. I think in the Southwest, energy are us, because we have wonderful resources in wind and solar, in natural gas, in Texas, they've got nuclear. I mean, we really have a diverse supply of energy. And I think, building out that transmission can help us avoid the problems that are clearly on the way, because we have a 50 to 60-year-old interstate highway. I mean, if you can imagine driving our trucks, I mean, we're already having supply chain problems as it is on our roads. We're now trying to survive a 50 and 60-year-old electric grid. And so having that modernized allows other things that can be that we really dramatically need in rural America, which is also the high-speed internet and the reliability of those systems. So they go hand in glove. So I would just say to you, I think, it has been a real joy to work, both as a state regulator as well as someone that was working on trying to build out, modernize these regional planning sectors across the country, because it means that we can live anywhere. We can live anywhere, and we can keep, agriculture alive, out in rural America, yet we have the most modern tools and technology available to us in our own homes, in our own small offices, out in towns of 300 or 500, where my husband and I had our ranch. So I just would say to you that having done this and looked at energy policy for over 40 years, this is the most exciting thing. This is a legacy, for our generation to basically leave for our kids and grandkids a modern grid, just like when Dwight Eisenhower built the interstate highway system. This is our legacy, to build this interstate electric transmission system and to really prepare ourselves for America really, being the kind of modern technology giant, and not having to do it from the major cities, but doing it from every part of our country. Every part of the country can share in the benefit. So I would just say that as we talk about this today and go through a little bit more of the metrics and the details, I can just say from my personal experience, I can identify numerous projects around the country that have benefited and are, one more thing I have to say. Okay, so when we first opened that first wind farm in Oklahoma, we had this huge debate at the commission and with all the rural, with all the electric, the investor-owned utilities, the industrials. Everyone said, oh my gosh, nobody's gonna want, electricity made from wind. That's just not right. And so we said, okay, let's do a poll. Let's go out and do a survey and see what people thought. And we, and all the folks at the commission say, oh, well, this is just one of those green things. This is just an environmental thing. Nobody else really will care about this. Well, that is not what came back to us. People love the idea. And for rural America, for them, and particularly Western Oklahoma, they associated the great benefit that, the wind brought them after really the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression in Oklahoma, because they identified the wind bringing water to the surface for farm country. And so they had that positive, positive idea about how wind can also really modernize and bring this economic growth through the electric system. So we were really surprised, and we actually allowed people to sign up for electricity. Well, we signed up in less than a week for that whole first wind farm, all the electricity, consumers all over. And this was rural Oklahoma, Western Oklahoma, signed up for that power. So I just want you to know that there is a pent up demand for having, the best of everything, the best of technology. And that can only happen if we've got a modern electric transmission grid that helps everybody in the country, not just urban America. So anyway, I'll stop there, Sarah.
Thank you, Denise. Appreciate that personal perspective as well as all your expertise over the years of working on these issues. It's now my pleasure to introduce our last panelist, who's a fifth generation Oklahoman, whose family has lived and farmed in Oklahoma for more than a century, Congressman Frank Lucas. He was first elected to the United States House of Representatives in a special election in 1994, currently serves as the ranking member on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, and the longest serving Republican on the House Committee on Financial Services, and a man who I got to see quite a bit when he was chair of the House Ag Committee. So look forward to that perspective as well. He graduated from Oklahoma State University in 1982 with a degree in ag economics. Welcome, Congressman Lucas.
Thank you, Sarah, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and the indulgence and tolerance. We've been in a series of votes this morning, and my greatest first responsibility is cast votes on behalf of my 791,000 constituents who cover almost half the landmass of the great state of Oklahoma. And by the way, I note my fellow Oklahoman, Denise Bode, whether she'll admit it or not, I think turns 27 or 28 today. So it's Denise's birthday, whether she'll admit it or not. Happy birthday, Denise. And from one fellow Oklahoman to another, I can't help but note the comments about the struggles and strains and the importance of making sure rural Oklahoma has a chance, rural America has a chance at infrastructure equivalent to what everyone else has. It's how we grow the economy. It's how we improve standard of living. It's how we incentivize good people to stay in rural America and come home. My personal perspective, and just humor me for a moment, the farm I live on, my great uncle rented in 1912. He married my great aunt in 1914. They bought the place. The significance is not only did they survive through the Great Depression of World War I, when the European War blocked ag exports to Europe in 1915 and 1916, they survived the drought of the 1930s. They survived the second great economic depression, as my uncle used to say, the 1930s, the drought of the 50s. We face lots of challenges, but one of the things my uncle used to point out to me was on the farm he lived on in 1912, where they used coal oil lamps, they had a wood stove even before and after he married my aunt. In 1912, the community down the creek, so to speak, got a little town of Strong City, Oklahoma, got municipal power. So from the time he arrived as a renter in 1912, he could see down the creek the electric lights of Strong City. There would not be an opportunity for rural electrification in North Roger Mills County until the passage of the REA Act in 1935, Rural Electrification Administration. And consequently, resources were limited during the Second World War. During wartime, the critical thing is national defense. Of course, they wouldn't receive electric power until after the Second World War. So literally from 1912 until 1945, 1946, they could see the electric lights of the town downstream, but they used coal oil lamps and firewood, and they had a wind charger when they wanted to listen to the radio after they were fortunate enough to acquire one of those. That's my perspective. The infrastructure has not always been there, and the reason we have the infrastructure now is a combination of public and private partnerships trying to make sure that all those things are available. Now, in my role as ranking member of the House Science Committee and legacy chairman, so to speak, of the Ag Committee, the rural utility services and those rural electric issues fell under my committee jurisdiction and are still close to my heart. But as Science Committee chairman, we're looking at how do you make sure that the grid, the electrical supply system in this country, can keep up with what is an ever increasing demand? And how do you make sure that that supply, that resource is available consistently across the country? There's much discussion in this nation about electric vehicles. I would remind all of my fellow listeners on here, if you're going to convert a dramatic portion of the American transportation fleet to electricity, that's going to require that electric power. We don't have the capacity right now to meet the demand if everyone just simply went from combustion engines to electric automobiles and electric trucks. We don't have the capacity. So the Science Committee, with the legislation that we work on dealing with energy research at the Department of Energy and a variety of other things from the National Science Foundation on down, is focused on how do you make the grid more reliable? How do you make it more efficient? How do you make it more available? Part of that is the question of sources of electric power. Natural gas, as my fellow Oklahomans would tell you, is an awesome resource. Wind, solar, all the renewables, awesome resources. Nuclear power. We on the committee are working hard on the next form of power using the mechanics of the sun, fusion, not splitting atoms, but combining atoms to create a clean, cost-effective way to meet our energy needs for hundreds of years, if not longer. But in addition to power source, we're discussing how do smart grids work effectively? How do you make sure that you can move power from point A to point B or to point C? Demand typically is not located where the most convenient locations are for windmills or solar panels. Not everybody wants an atomic power plant next door or a gas-fired power plant next door. We only have so many places to build hydroelectric dams, and that's almost impossible anymore. So how do you improve the ability to move power around so that when it's hot in the summertime, wherever you're at in the United States, you can flip the switch and be cooler, so that when you're cold in the wintertime, you can flip that switch the other direction and be warm in the wintertime. The bottom line is this: we tend in this country to take our electrical power grid and our sources of generation, and compared to the rest of the world, relatively cheap prices in most places, all right, cost-effective prices compared to the rest of the world in most places for granted. But we're here because of the public utilities, the investor-owned utilities, all of those resources and efforts channeled by the federal government to get us to this point. We now need to move forward together. So It's a pleasure to be on board today, and I look forward. I think we're almost to the question point, the questions that we're going to have from our friends. But this miracle called the electrical distribution system in this great nation, the grid, the transportation, the generation systems. I knew the people who came along before that was available for everyone. I like the fact that it is available for almost everyone now, and we need to assure that that continues and improves as we move forward. With that, Sarah, thank you for the opportunity to visit.
Thank you, Congressman Lucas. Always great to see you. And I'd like to have all of our panelists join in. We've got a bunch of questions from our audience, so I'll try to consolidate a couple of these. But Administrator McLean, if you could join us back here. And one of the first questions I want to direct to you, and it's something that hopefully you can give us some insight on for rural development programs. The questioner wants to know, what services does rural development have to upgrade poorly situated distribution grids in rural areas that fall under the ownership of regulated utility companies? They're asking about trying to get a three-phase power for a rural lumber mill. And after trying to do this for 10 years, they're still unsuccessful in making it work. You have some insights on who they can talk to and get some answers on that?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. But first, allow me to thank Congressman Lucas for his long-standing support for the Rural Utility Service, and your story about rural electrification was so compelling, and that is what drives us. You know, that beautiful statute, the Rural Electrification Act, is focused on financing power for rural consumers. So if you're in a rural eligible rural area, you know, our dollars are available to be able to meet those needs, whether it's to upgrade your system to get three-phase power to a factory, or to be able to open up a new development in your area. But the tricky part of our job, of course, is because we're not a regulator, we have to have people come to us. We'll outreach to them. We'll explain our programs. We'll say, hey, we can dispatch our field staff. We have wonderful, the undersecretary talked about the general field representatives who are spread out across the country, and they can reach out to individual utilities and say, you know, I've got these programs that can work. We've got the Rural Energy Savings Program, which can make a 0% interest rate loan to the utility. The utility could then lend money for energy efficiency to the factory to be able to get the services and efficiency that they need. Or we can finance with treasury rate of interest rates that upgrade to the three-phase power. But I can't make anybody take our money. Or so it's that long-standing partnership. We work with our network of 600 borrowers. We reach out to entities that are not part of our club yet, but we'll offer those services. And then there is the role for the state and federal regulators who have service requirements, because again, we don't regulate the 50 states, we lend into the 50 states and deal with whatever those rules are at the state level. I did put in the chat my email address. I might have put it into the wrong answer question. I was trying to get as close proximate to the question as how do I contact Mr. McLean? Well, so if the folks with the three-phase power question want to send me an email, I will certainly be glad to take a look at it. But the message to the utility serving that factory is, you know, come to RUS. We've got some great programs available. Congress enacted in the bipartisan infrastructure law some terrific programs at the Department of Energy, which are about to roll out. They have their grant-based programs. They haven't been announced yet. So I think there's going to be a unique funding opportunity, both with the traditional programs like under the Rural Electrification Act, as well as our neighbors across the street on Carl Street in the Department of Energy.
And thank you. And we'll make your email available, as well as one of the things that I know you do have a website that actually shows the offices in all the states.
That's correct. You can go to that website, click on your state, find one of what we call the general field representative that's responsible for your area, and send them a message as well.
Great. Next question, Rob, I'd like you to kick off and then go to Congressman Lucas, is just about, you showed a group of shovel-ready projects, over 20 projects. Really, if transmission is the key to unlocking rural economic development, and some folks have asked, where do we get the numbers and the data to prove that? But how do we get it built? And what would you like to see happen in Washington? And then I'll ask the Congressman what is happening from his perspective about how do we get more transmission built? So Rob, if you could kick us off.
Yeah, sure, Sarah. I appreciate the question. I usually describe the transmission barriers as the 3 Ps: planning, permitting, and paying. The planning part, I think we need to get together. There are these regional planning groups. Denise mentioned the Southwest Power Pool. That's one in that part of the country, but they are around the rest of the region. They need to really kind of get the utilities together, get all the stakeholders together, and proactively plan. I think that's starting to happen now in a bunch of places. The permitting part, obviously, it's hard to permit any type of infrastructure, especially long linear infrastructure. But there's a lot of work happening and support for states to get involved in that and find appropriate routes for transmission lines. And then the paying part, I actually think is the hardest, because again, transmission is a public good. It benefits really everybody, or at least so many people across such wide areas that it's sort of like, if we had to pass the hat to pay for interstate highways, we wouldn't get many highways. So, we're not saying it needs to be a government function, but some of these financing tools and tax credits could really help lessen the cost. Really, they would reflect the national benefit and the broad regional benefits of transmission. So there are some of these incentives. Administrator McLean mentioned his program, but also the Department of Energy has a new Building a Better Grid initiative that has some financing tools, some of which are new from the bipartisan infrastructure law. So those can be helpful as well. So those are the general categories of barriers, and some things, I think very positive things happening in national policy to address each of the planning, permitting, and paying challenges.
Congressman Lucas, from your perspective, what might we see happen in Congress as we go into what is going to be a midterm election and a lot of other issues confronting the country, including the war in Ukraine? What can we expect?
It's going to be a very challenging end of the year. I'm a legacy member of the Ag Committee. I'm the hopefully presently ranking member, incoming Science Committee Chairman if all works out in November, senior most Republican on financial services. So I'm not on intelligence, I'm not on foreign affairs, I'm not on the military committees. But it looks to me like the process, the tragedy that's unfolding on the other side of the world is going to last. The effects are going to last for a year or 2 or 3. And it's going to have a dramatic effect on the budgeting process. The great debate in my tenure in Congress is defense and non-defense. What should the ratio be? If you increase one, should you increase the other? What should the balance number be? The last so many months now have demonstrated that we live in a very dangerous world. And there'll be a tremendous amount of pressure, and I think rightfully so, to address our ability to defend ourselves and to provide resources to our friends and allies to defend themselves. So there's going to be a lot of pressure budget-wise on military spending. That said, we've just come out of, or in fingers crossed, coming out of a 2-year process with a virus that no one expected 2.5 years ago. It's turned us all upside down. How will our response medically continue to address that? How will the economy, individuals address that? So there's a great deal of uncertainty out there, Sarah, and what lies ahead of us. But I would note this: increasing transmission, addressing the reliability of the grid, increasing the number of power generation sources that are acceptable to the overwhelming number of our fellow Americans is a matter of economic survival. I would just ask the folks who are involved in the transmission process to be thoughtful about the world we live in. In Oklahoma, we have an example of our wind energy business, as Denise would allude to, that has dramatically grown and expanded in the last, what, almost 25 years, Denise? Has it been 25 years now? Dramatically grown and expanded. But the sensitivity about where you place, and this is an example, I think, that references transmission. The sensitivity about where you place those windmills makes a huge difference to our neighbors. And Linda and I live out in the rural part of the 3rd District of Oklahoma. We don't have any electric windmills on our property, but I can see them all in all directions. South of the house, from one horizon to the other, calmly going round and round, generating electricity. Placing windmills is a whole lot less controversial if you do it out in the countryside where those people like myself live. The only problems we've had in Oklahoma is when someone tries to get close to the urban areas to minimize the transmission process to take the product straight to the consumer. For some reason, my folks in the suburbs don't necessarily like the same or will tolerate the same landscape features I will out on the farm. We have to place our transmission where we will have public support. And if you're placing it in places like that, whatever the source is, it also means building those transmission lines, being thoughtful. Sometimes the shortest distance between 2 points is not the most politically viable path. Factoring in how we build our transmission lines that causes the least disruption to the people who ironically will benefit from those lines is just a necessity. We're no longer in a world where people will let things happen and say, oh, well, the government did it, or this did it, or that did it. We now live in a world where everyone has an instant communication device, and everyone can instantly contact tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. We've just got to be thoughtful in how we develop and expand our grid. Again, I'm an old ag economist. I understand finite resources, unlimited demands, and trying to maximize the efficiency. But when you're building transmission lines, the shortest distance between point A and point B may not be the most cost-effective distance. Was that carefully worded, Denise?
Yeah, let's bring Denise in to comment. Because one of our questioners asked, and I know you hear this all the time, Congressman, but people want the benefits of transmission. They want the benefits of broadband. They want all these things to make everything work, but they don't necessarily want to see it work. They don't necessarily want to see those windmills, the transmission lines, even some of these solar farms that are across the country. Denise, just as we wrap up here, we've got just 2 minutes left. Give us some of your thoughts on how do we help people see these benefits a little bit differently?
Well, I think, that's what we're trying to do here is we're trying to utilize your wonderful platform to share the good news. I think that is, and all of us who've been on the the front lines out there trying to cite, and help, I mean, we lose thousands of miles of existing transmission every year. And, and Frank knows Western Oklahoma, those ice storms come through and man, it dominoes down. So we not only have the issues of new transmission that he pointed out, it's just about even putting up new, existing lines, replacing them. And so I think that there has got to be a partnership, between, business community, between farm community, and between those of us, who are regulators at state and federal level and developers. There's got to be that public dialogue. And I think that's what we're trying to do is to create that public-private dialogue and to have this discussion, but as we're doing it, not wait until it's like front lines with people in opposition. And so I think all these comments are really well taken, and I think that is what's going to have to happen. Is good people are going to have to realize that after the pandemic, life is never going to be the same again. It is never going to be the same. People want to work more remotely. They have changed their lifestyles and their patterns. They like being with their family more. And that's a good thing. And that's particularly something, an ethic we care about, in rural America. And so, it is going to take, a balance. You can't have it one way or the other way. You got to have a balance, and you have to be thoughtful about where things are sited. And that is the role of having sort of a community working together to try to make sure those things happen, because the benefits are there. They are seen. Anybody that's been involved with a wind farm in farm country with wind turbines on their land knows that those contracts that you get are not, up and down, with the price of the fuel. They are long-term contracts that are assets that help, that the farm credit system and that CoBank and others really value, that can help keep farms alive during bad climate problems, during, storms, during, droughts, during, whatever happens. And so, there's got to be a balance, and there's got to be, good intentions by folks, but we do all need to come together and talk about it. And, that's kind of what we did at the commission. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do in a broader community here.
One quick thought from Sarah, from rural America's perspective, if it's okay. We also need to remember in rural America, where we have difficulties funding our courthouses and our schoolhouses, whether it's renewable energy or traditional power production or the transmission lines, they're all ad valorem taxpayers. They're supporting the local school districts. They're supporting the county courthouses. They are many times in places where there's not a lot of high value infrastructure on the ad valorem tax rolls. They make everybody's life better by helping our schools and our county government. Just a side note.
Thank you, Congressman. When we look at rural economic development, it's the jobs, it's the tax base, it's the quality of life in rural, the ability to, bring the next generation home so that they can have economic opportunities as well. So there's a lot of different things to consider here. I'm sure we could keep going with this discussion. We had over 20 questions here, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but thank you. And we will divide those up to the respective panelists and see if we can get some additional answers for you. I'd also like to thank again Americans for Clean Energy Grid and welcome the dialogue that you can have with them as a result of our sponsorship here for the webinar and ongoing dialogues that I think that we can all have as we look at improving not only rural economic development, but our rural electrical grids. So with that, we've run out of time, but thank you all again, our panelists. You did a great job. And thanks to all of the participants. Have a good day.
Thank you.